I have a sermon from Daniel 3 I've just worked on, only preached it a couple times. I'd really like to preach it tonight. I almost tried to preach it this morning, and the Lord will not let me, but I like it. It's a good sermon. It's entitled, That God is Our God. The king said, who is that God? And they answer, our God, whom we serve. So you can look it up, get your own sermon out of it. And then I thought, well, I'll preach on storms, because our sister sang so beautifully. I got a sermon I really like on Jesus sleeping during the storm. But the Lord's not going to let me do that either. So I'm going to do something I have not done in a very long time. I'm going to preach you a partially done sermon. So Ephraim is a cake not turned. I'm a little bit half-baked, all right? I worked on this all this afternoon, never preached it anywhere. I've been working on it for a while. So turn, if you will, to 1 Samuel chapter 21. 3 scenes in the sermon. 1 Samuel chapter 21. David came to Nob to Ahimelech, the priest. Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David and said unto him, why art thou alone and no man with thee? David said unto Ahimelech the priest, the king hath commanded me on a business, and hath said unto me, let no man know anything of the business whereabout I send thee. Is that true? No, he's lying. He's running away from Saul. But I've commanded thee and appointed my servants to such and such a place. Now therefore, what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in mine hand, or what there is present. Either give me 5 loaves or whatever you got. And the priest answered David and said, there is no common bread under mine hand. There's hallowed bread if the young men have kept themselves at least from women. And David answered the priest and said unto him, of a truth, women have been kept from us about these 3 days since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in a manner common. It's kind of ordinary bread. Why? He just said that. Yea, though it was sanctified this day in the vessel. So the priest gave him hallowed bread. For there was no bread there but the show bread that was taken from before the Lord from the tabernacle, to put hot bread in the day when it was taken away. Now, a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord. His name was Doeg, an Edomite, pagans, ungodly, arch enemies of God's people. But he wormed his way into Saul's service and had a pretty important position, the chiefest of the herdmen that belonged to Saul. Scene number 2 in 1 Samuel chapter 22. Saul is bemoaning the fact that nobody is standing by him. He says, none of you feel sorry for me. It's bad enough to feel sorry for yourself. Expect others to feel sorry for you too. See, if you're feeling sorry for yourself, that job's already done, so I don't have to do it. And he says, none of you has told me what David has done, and none of you has felt sorry for me. And he said that, verse 6, Saul heard that David was discovered, and the men that were with him. Now Saul abode in Gibeah under a tree in Ramah, having a spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing by him. And Saul said to his servants that stood about him, hear now, ye Benjamites, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make you all captains of thousands and captains of hundreds, that all of you have conspired against me? And there's none of you that showeth me that my son hath made a league with the son of Jesse. And there is none of you that is sorry for me, or showeth unto me that my son hath stirred up my servant against me. That wasn't true, by the way. To lie in wait as at this day. Then answered Doeg the Edomite, which was set over the servants of Saul, and said, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. And he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him victuals, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Then the king sent to call Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house, the priests that were in Nob, and they came all of them to the king. And Saul said, hear now, thou son of Ahimelech. And he answered, here am I, my lord. And Saul said unto them, why have you conspired against me? Watch out for people who see conspiracies everywhere. I think there's an ideological conspiracy, and the devil's behind it. Now, some people are just stupid. They're not conspiring, they're just stupid. I think a lot of the things that have been done in the name of medicine lately just have been stupid. I don't know if it's a big conspiracy. And he said, why have you conspired against me, thou and the son of Jesse, and that thou hast given him bread and a sword, and hast inquired of God for him? Why, how dare you ask God what he wants David to do? Shame on you. What do you think, you're a priest or something? That he should rise against me to lie in wait as at this day. Saul's wrong about that too. David could have killed Saul twice, wouldn't do it. I will not lift my hand against the Lord's anointed. Then Ahimelech answered the king and said, who is so faithful among all thy servants as David? I didn't know David wasn't with you anymore. Which is the king's son-in-law. Your pastor introduced to me his daughter and his wife's son-in-law. That's how he said it this morning. This is your son-in-law, and goeth at thy bidding, and is honorable in thine house. Did I then begin to inquire God for him? Far be it from me. Let not the king impute anything unto his servant, nor to all the house of my father. For thy servant knew nothing of all this, less or more. And the king said, well, I understand. You acted innocently. No, you didn't. Thou shalt surely die, Ahimelech, thou and all thy father's house. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill your whole family. Because you did something you thought was right, didn't have any reason to know better, but I didn't like it. And the king said unto the footmen that stood about him, turn and slay the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew and he fled and did not show it to me. But the servants of the king would not put forth their hand to fall upon the priests of the Lord. They were right. All human authority is limited by God's authority. I could tell you the lady, I could tell you the book. She was a great lady, and she wrote a book, and she said a wife should always obey her husband, even if he asks her to sin. I sat at a dinner with she and her husband, and she told me of a young mother that had a husband wanted her to view evil things with her. And the wife demurred and didn't want to go. And this lady said, I told her, why not go and just ask God to protect your mind? That's stupid. As they say, why not drink and just ask God to protect your liver? They were my elders. The man had been my pastor for a while, and I looked up to him and appreciated him in many ways. And I said, well, couldn't you take the position that all human authority is limited by God's authority? And we ought to obey God rather than man. And the man nodded, and the wife didn't say anything. The Bible messes up a lot of your ideas. They said, no, we're not going to do it. And the king said to Doeg, turn thou and fall upon the priests. And Doeg the Edomite turned, and he fell upon the priests and slew on that day 85 persons that did wear a linen ephod, 85 of God's servants. And Nob, the city of the priests, smote he with the edge of the sword. He didn't stop. Ahimelech had come to Saul. Saul has Ahimelech in his father's house killed. And then Doeg goes to Nob, and he, with the edge of the sword, he slew both men and women, children and sucklings and oxen and asses and sheep with the edge of the sword. He killed everybody. He killed every living creature. He killed babies that were not able yet to eat solid food. He killed children. He killed women. And one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar showed David that Saul had slain the Lord's priests. And David said unto Abiathar, I knew it. That day when Doeg the Edomite was there, I knew his being there would be no good. I knew that he'd cause trouble. I knew it. That he would surely tell Saul. I knew he'd tell him. He didn't know Saul would kill everybody. I have occasioned the death of all the persons of thy father's house. Was that true? David took more responsibility than was really his. Doeg did more evil than he was commanded to do. Saul used his authority to harm people who hadn't really done him any harm. And then turn over to Psalm 52. I was reading this psalm a while ago, and I was struck by something. the introduction to the psalm before the first verse says, to the chief musician, Maskil, the psalm of David, when Doeg the Edomite came and told Saul and said unto him, David is come to the house of Ahimelech. Why boastest thou in mischief, O mighty man? The judgment of God shall fall upon you. Is that what it says? Well, it does later on. God will destroy thee forever, verse 5. Why boastest thou in mischief, O mighty man? Remember, David is feeling really guilty. He's grieved that because he asked for bread from Ahimelech, 85 people have died. And he's just burdened about it, and he's writing a psalm now, and the psalm is inspired scripture. David is moved by the Spirit of God to write these words, and he does not write, God's going to get you, you get yours, it's going to come one day. What goes around comes around. Sowing and reaping is going to take place in your life. He writes this, why boastest thou in mischief, O mighty man? What's the next word? The goodness of God endureth continually. Imagine somebody's about to take your life, say, better be careful, the goodness of God endureth continually. Imagine somebody has harmed your family and you're going to pronounce on, hey, I want you to know something, buddy, you did that to my family. The goodness of God endures continually. Interesting. Lord, help me. Best I know I'm doing what you want me to do, so I ask you to guide me and empower me and direct me. Draw us to yourself. Encourage us. Help us to leave here knowing and understanding you a little bit better. We'll give you the praise for all that's done. It's always all of you, but I'm more aware of it tonight than I sometimes am. So help us and meet with us and help us to obey whatever you tell us to do. In Jesus' name, amen. 3 scenes. Scene 1 is Doeg bad. He's a bad dude. He's an evil man. He boasts about his evil. He not only does bad things, but he brags about them. We learn about the report that he delivers. Hey, Saul, I'll tell you something about David. None of these other guys, well, I'll tell you. He came to him and gave him some bread. He gave Goliath a sword. Everybody loves a tattletale, don't they? The report that he delivers, the ruination that he devotes himself to when nobody else is willing to kill the servants of God, the Lord's priest. Doeg says, I'll kill them. And he kills 85 of them with the edge of the sword. Can you imagine that? Not with a gun, with a sword. It takes some work to kill somebody, even with a sharp sword. Doeg goes after it. But notice not only the report he delivers, the ruination that he devotes himself to, but notice the rejoicing that he demonstrates. David says, you're boasting in mischief. Yeah, you should have seen those priests when I cut their heads off. Man, by the end, I was getting pretty good. I could do it in one swat. Yeah, 85. You ever seen 85 headless corpses lying down? Boy, I did that. They're in their linen robes. They're so proud of those linen robes. They're all bloody and messy. By the time I was done with that, I didn't stop there. I went back to their city. I killed their wives. I killed children. I killed little babies. I killed all the animals. You better not get on my bad side, man. I will clean your clock. Boasting about evil. We live in an era where people boast about evil. They think it's good they burn down somebody else's building. They think it's good they harm an officer of the law who's trying to keep the peace. They think it's good they take 6 and now 7, I guess, blocks of a major city and control it, and people die in there and the police can't get in to help them. They think that's good. And they brag about it. And the media calls them mostly peaceful protests. Doeg bad, David sad. I can't believe it. I knew it. I saw Doeg there. I had this premonition. I felt something's going to be wrong because of this. Doeg's not to be trusted. He's an evil man. He's an Edomite. I don't know why Saul made him the chief herdman and put him in charge of so many of his servants, but I know he's a bad dude. I knew it. When I saw him there, I knew something bad would happen. It's all my fault. Yeah, David has some responsibility. He lied. to Ahimelech to get some bread. But he wasn't doing anything would legitimately have caused their death. Only the evil of King Saul and the wickedness of Doeg caused their death. David is sad, Doeg is bad, but the third scene is intriguing to me. He's going to sing about it. He's going to write a poem. He's going to sing. He's going to click his heels. He's going to rejoice. You read the end of this psalm, and he says, the righteous, verse 6, also shall see and fear and laugh at him. Lo, this is the man that made not God his strength, but trusted in the abundance of his riches and strengthened himself in his wickedness. But I'm like a green olive tree in the house of God. I have been planted in God's house. I'm going to grow. I'm going to produce good fruit. I trust in the mercy of God forever and ever. I'll praise thee forever, because thou hast done it. And I'll wait on thy name, for it is good before thy saints. David goes from being responsible in his own mind, being grieved and burdened at the death of 85 priests and their children and a number of other people in the city of Nob, to being glad and excited and rejoicing in God. Why did he do that? Not because Doeg was going to be judged, not because God would get him in the end, not because he was going to heaven and Doeg was going to hell, but he said, why do you boast in your mischief, in your iniquity, you evil man? The goodness of God endureth continually. We like to think, well, God will get them. Yeah, you liberal mayors, even your cities burned down, you go ahead and do some of the dumb things they've done, subjugating themselves to the rioters and confessing sins they never committed and humiliating themselves. You're getting what you deserve for all your stupid policies that you've had all these years. Yeah, you go ahead, live that wicked lifestyle. You'll get some disease because of it. Use those drugs. Your mind will be fried. That's not what David said. He said, you know, my hope, my joy, my encouragement, my security, my protection, my future, my peace is not in God's judgment on my enemies. It is on God's goodness to me. That word's an interesting word. I think you'd say it chesed. H-E-S-E-D, but a kind of a C-H sound almost. It's used 248 times in the Old Testament. Jesus refers to it in Matthew chapter 9 and verse 13. He's talking to the Pharisees. And he said, you Pharisees, you need to go and learn what that means. He refers them to Hosea chapter 6, where the Bible says, I'm not interested in your sacrifice. I'm interested in mercy. It's the same word. This word is a really big word. It is probably the largest word, most important word used to describe God's behavior and God's character. It's sometimes translated mercy. It's sometimes translated goodness. It's sometimes translated loving kindness. It's sometimes translated kindness. And they're all right translations. This word is so big, there's no one word in our English language that explains it. Now, they're all right. I'm not saying any of them are wrong. I'm saying you learn what a word means by how God uses it. So I looked through the Bible. I've read every one of those 248 verses in the last little bit. And it's real interesting. It's not only God's goodness and God's mercy and God's loving kindness. It has to do with God's commitment to keep his covenant. Let's look at a couple verses. Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse 9. Know therefore that the Lord thy God, he is God, the faithful God, which keepeth covenant and mercy with them that love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. Solomon used that word in the first book of Kings. In chapter 8, he's rejoicing at the building of the tabernacle. I didn't think that verse looked right. I was in 2 Kings. And Solomon says, the Lord God of Israel, There is no God like thee in heaven above or on earth beneath, who keepeth covenant and mercy with all thy servants that walk with thee with all thy hearts. Now, that's a big deal. Nehemiah uses that word in chapter 1 and verse 5. It's all through the Psalms. Psalm 63 says, thy loving kindness, thy hesed, thy mercy, thy love, thy goodness, thy covenant keeping is better to me than life. I'll sing of the mercies, the hesed of the Lord forever. As the heaven is high above the earth, so great is his mercy, his loving kindness, his goodness, his grace to all of us. The closest Greek word to that word hesed, they say, is the word charis or charis, which is the word for grace. And the Bible says, hey, you know what? You have never kept your promise to God, but God has always kept his promise to you. Amen. So, what do you learn from this? Probably a lot more than I got. But I'll give you what I got. Number one, man cannot be flawless. Solomon said, there is no man that sinneth not. If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves. Now, that doesn't excuse sin. We're always responsible. We could always rely on God. There is no temptation taking you, but such as is common to man. God is faithful. He will not suffer to be tempted above that you're able. With the temptation, make a way of escape that you may be able to bear it. But nobody's ever done that. Man cannot be flawless. God can only be faithful. That's all he can be. God cannot fail. God cannot lie. God can never violate his own character. When the Bible says all of sin comes short of the glory of God, the idea is not that there's a bunch of rules that God always obeys. No. All the rules emanate from the character of God. And when you sin, you fall short of who God is and how he manifests himself to us. Joseph's in prison. He's there unjustly. He has been lied about, and Potiphar's wife has had him put in jail. I think she's frustrated at her inability to seduce a slave. And I think if you read the story carefully, I think Potiphar knew. I think he knew. But he was embarrassed and had to save face. And the Bible says that when Joseph's in jail, he saw the grace of God. No, it doesn't. You know what it says in Genesis chapter 39? It says Joseph's in jail. Now he's there unjustly. It's a terrible place. We talk about the fetters hurting him while he's there. And he learned the mercy of God. Same word. Mercy. You learn mercy in jail. Wait, we think of grace as God giving us good things we don't deserve. He gives us good when we deserve bad. And mercy is when he withholds punishment that we deserve. But the Bible says God, while Joseph was in jail, showed him his mercy. You know what? Joseph is in jail, but God is still faithful. Joseph is in jail, but it's not the hell he deserves. Joseph is in jail, but God has never forgotten him. Joseph is in jail. His father doesn't know where he was. His brothers have betrayed him. His master's wife has lied about him. His master, I think, has put him in prison knowing that he doesn't belong there. And he says, wow, isn't God good? Yeah, God's good. See, we occupy one tiny little slice of eternity called time. And we're one little dot in that tiny slice of eternity called time. And we think we understand it all. I never did think my parents were merciful when they spanked me. But they were. Boy, I see what happens when people grow up without discipline, grow up thinking that they deserve everything they want. I've seen the snowflakes. I used to use the term millennial. I don't use that word because it's really not an age, it's an attitude. We got people that age group that work hard and raise their kids right and were raised right. But we got a bunch of people that were raised like Adonijah, neither his father displeased him at any time. And they just think everything ought to go their way. They should win every game. They should get a prize for everything they do. They should always have the best paper. Their pictures should be put on the wall. And nobody should ever tell them they're wrong. Man, I am glad I didn't come out like that. Those people are miserable adults. Was it meanness that my mother spanked me? Well, probably sometimes. Most feared words in my childhood were those words, bend over. But I'll tell you what, I am glad I had parents that taught me there was a penalty for doing wrong. I'm glad I had parents who taught me you can't have everything you want. I'm glad I had parents who taught me you have to restrain your own desires. I'm glad I had parents who taught me to respect authority. And Joseph is in jail, and he finds out, in spite of all the injustice of man, that man's injustice can never overcome God's goodness. Man cannot be flawless. God can only be faithful. So we don't need to be fearful. I wonder what's going to happen in our country. I wonder what kind of a country we're going to leave to our children and our grandchildren. I understand that. We have grandchildren all at our house last week. 11, 8, 7, and 5. And I want them to grow up in a good land. I want them to have freedom. I want them to be able to go to church without anybody coming to disrupt their services. I don't want them to go to jail because they preach what the Bible says about lifestyles of somebody that gets offended because of that. But I know what I'm depending on is not the Constitution of the United States, and it's not the makeup of the Supreme Court, and it's not who sits in the White House. My grandchildren will be cared for by the goodness of God. See, I'm here today because of the goodness of God. You're here today because of the goodness of God. It was 1949. A young man had gotten out of the Army, decided to go to college on the GI Bill. He lived in Massachusetts and thought he would go to Columbia University in New York City. On the way back from visiting there on the bus, he met a couple of kids that grew up in his neighborhood in Springfield, Massachusetts. Now, this young man never went to church, and these kids were the only kids in that neighborhood that went to church but didn't go to a Catholic church. They went to a gospel chapel. They said, what are you doing? He said, well, I went to Columbia. I want to be a radio announcer. He said, I want to go on the radio and have all the pretty girls send me flowers. They said, we ought to go to our college. We got a radio program. We have our own radio station. Where do you go? They said, we go to Bob Jones University. Just moved to Greenville, South Carolina. The young man said later, there's something different about them. Their spirit, their demeanor, their speech. They got his name and address, and they sent him material, and Bob Jones accepted him before Columbia did. And he thought, I like the South. I was in the South when I was in the Army. I'll go down there. And almost on a whim, he gets on a bus. He goes from Springfield, Massachusetts to Greenville, South Carolina, January of 1949. Never heard the gospel one time in his life. An old preacher, Bob Jones Sr. Go on the internet and listen to some of his sermons, not his chapel talks. That's all the university likes to release. Listen, he preached, man. Go on down, lad, he said. Go on down to Sodom. It's a nice place to raise cattle, but it's a lousy place to raise children. Pictures of him, sweat popping off his brow, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled up, one leg cocked back, his fist made up to punch the devil in the nose. And that old Bob Jones Sr. got up and he said, young man, what if your mother knew everything you'd ever done? The young man thought, ooh, I wouldn't want my mother to know everything I'd ever done. And then he said, God does. And then he preached the gospel. And the young man said, that sounds like a good deal to me. And he would tell you to the day he died. He died November of 2018. He would tell you that day that he was saved sitting in his seat. That's when he decided to believe on the Lord Jesus Christ. But he got out of his seat because they told him he went down the front of an evangelist that was working at the school then named Monroe Parker met him at the front. And my understanding of the story is he had a big grin on his face by then. The joy of the Lord had begun to spread through his soul and reflect itself on his countenance. And Monroe Parker said, what are you laughing at? And he went in the room and he formalized his decision to trust Christ. And that young man was my dad. And I exist as a person because a couple guys on a bus were just a good testimony one day. I exist as the person I am because of the goodness of God. God has in so many ways done so many things to help me enjoy so many blessings. How do I dare complain about anything? I'm here because of God's goodness, and so are you. Let the rioters riot. The goodness of God endureth continually. Let them burn down buildings. The goodness of God endureth continually. Let the politicians scheme to take away our freedom. The goodness of God endureth continually. You may have an unsaved boss who's mean as the devil to you, but the goodness of God endures continually. Your spouse may be unfaithful to you, but the goodness of God endureth continually. You may get a bad report from the doctor, but the goodness of God endureth continually. You may run into financial trouble, but the goodness of God endureth continually. Your children may go off and break your heart, but the goodness of God endureth continually. Go ahead, Supreme Court, tell us after a while that we're going to have to hire transgender and homosexual people in our churches, or shut down, or lose our tax-exempt status. I want you to know the Church of Jesus Christ has never been dependent on government for its existence. We've had churches before there was a Declaration of Independence. There'll be churches after the Declaration of Independence is ignored. We had churches when there was no First Amendment. We'll have churches when the First Amendment has been twisted by liberal judges, activist judges, to mean something different than the founders meant. You do whatever you want. My God sits in the heavens. He's done whatsoever he pleased, and the goodness of God endures continually. Go ahead, Hillary Clinton, tell us when it comes to abortion, religious beliefs will have to change. Can you imagine a politician telling churches what they're going to have to believe? That sounds like China. That sounds like Russia. That doesn't sound like the United States. But go ahead, Madam Hillary, you say whatever you want to. The goodness of God endureth continually. Mr. Buttigieg, a homosexual, ran for president, said that churches shouldn't be tax exempt if they don't embrace gay marriage and hire people who violate the Bible's standards by their lifestyle. You go ahead and huff and puff all you want, but the goodness of God endureth continually. Corrie ten Boom was in prison with her sister Betsy. And it was a dark day and everything was going badly, and she was as discouraged as she could possibly be. And she said, I wonder if God has abandoned us. I wonder if God still cares about us. She watched her sister starve to death in that German concentration camp. But before she did, she said, oh no, Corrie, he has not forgotten us. Remember his word. As the heaven is high above the earth, so great is his mercy to them that fear him. Alan Gardner, faithful missionary to the Picton Islands, just at the southern tip of South America. Endured all kinds of physical problems and deprivations and hardships and difficulties. But he said, while God gives me strength, failure will not daunt me. In 1851, at the age of 57, he died of his disease and of starvation. When his body was found, there was a diary right nearby. It bore the record of hunger, thirst, wounds, loneliness. The last entry in the diary showed his struggle to even write in a legible hand, and with shaky handwriting, he wrote these last words as his last entry. I am overwhelmed with a sense of the goodness of God. Why boasteth thou, O evil man? The goodness of God endureth continually. Woody White's an African-American preacher, Methodist. He got news that his mother had been viciously attacked. Somebody broke into her house. Mother was 80-something. They not only harmed her physically, they violated her in an awful way. They stole stuff. And he jumped in the car and made the 3-hour drive to get there as quickly as he could. He was overwhelmed. What's he going to say? How could this happen? Why would God let it take place? And he went to the door, and she greeted him with a smile. He took her in his arms. He said, I'm so sorry. I can't believe this happened. I don't know why this took place. And she said, oh, Woody, you listen to me. God is always good. And then he smelled something. He said, Mama, I smell fried chicken. Oh, she said, I knew you're coming, so I thought you'd be hungry. I cooked you something to eat. Can you imagine somebody doing that after that kind of treatment? An 80-year-old woman. How did she do that? The goodness of God endures continually. Say that with me. The goodness of God endureth continually. Not for a little while. Hey, I'm glad God's just, but I'm glad he's merciful, because if he's only just, I'd be dead and in hell. And I'm glad that those who do wrong are eventually going to have to answer for it. I guess my flesh takes some pleasure in that thought. But whatever happens to them doesn't change me one bit. If they live their whole life and nothing seems to ever go against them and they get everything they want and they're wicked as the devil, it doesn't change my life a bit. The goodness of God endureth continually. Father, best I know, I did what you want me to do. I don't know who needs the truth. I don't know what you want to do with it, but you do. So use it in our hearts and help us to act obediently. We'll thank you in Jesus' name for what you do. Amen.